Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Make sure I've got this working properly. Welcome. Thank you everybody for coming out to this meeting. We are here to talk about the Black Hills Context-Sensitive Corridors Study. Kind of a mouthful, so that might be the only time I say that phrase, but we're really glad to have you. Your input is invaluable to the process. This is a study of some wonderful terrain and the roads that traverse it. And we're really pleased to have a lot of comments and input that will enrich the study greatly. So this is the first of two public meetings that we're holding on this particular week. We have another meeting tomorrow night in Deadwood. And of course we're here in Custer tonight. The study has a website. It is shown here, the address bhcorridorstudy.com. So feel free to visit there for more information. All of the meeting displays that are up around the room are going to be posted there, and you can get updates on the project by visiting that site. Just some housekeeping items. You should have signed in as you came in the door, and feel free to do that if you didn't get a chance to do so. There are a number of methods tonight for commenting on the study. There's a comment card, and that'll be in the handout that you received, where you can make comments on individual study corridors and the study at large. You can certainly return that card tonight once you filled it out, or send it in to us later. Conversational comments, that might be the best mode of conversation and input tonight, is comments that we receive from you as we browse these boards, and that'll be after the presentation. That you'll get the chance to look at detailed information about each corridor and have conversations with the project team. And you can certainly correspond with us after the meeting, either via the website or by using our contact information that's in the handout. Comments will be due by September 7th, so that's roughly two and a half weeks away from now. By way of introduction, my name is Lyle DeVries. I am the consultant team project manager. On the project, we're working with the SDDOT and several partner agencies. Steve Graham, over in the corner there, is representing the DOT. He's the PM on the DOT side. The study advisory team is comprised of a number of representatives from different entities, including Federal Highway Administration, South Dakota Game, Fish and Parks, U.S. Forest Service, National Park Service, and the Spearfish Canyon Foundation. A little background on the study. Multiple state highways in the Black Hills are incredibly unique, one of a kind. This territory is rich with resources that are cultural, historic, environmental, and a plan is needed. A plan is needed to help the infrastructure continue to safely and efficiently move global visitors through these roadways and areas while protecting treasured resources. That plan needs to be well thought out, and improvements should be targeted carefully at those issues that arise in order to accomplish this. This is a study that's being done in three phases. Right now we're at phase one, which has been all about digging into these corridors and understand everything about them so that we can have a good knowledge base from which to identify strategic improvements. That will happen by way of visions. We're going to develop a separate vision for each of these 17 study corridors to account for the uniqueness that each brings. And that vision will include roadway improvements of various kinds that can be implemented. The second phase of the study will prioritize those improvements. So look at the array of ideas that have come up and look at them relative to each other and identify how limited resources, financial resources, should be allocated toward improvements that are emerging from the study. Phase 3 will be a more detailed look at just a few of the corridors that are particularly high priority and offer up great opportunities for earlier implementation. The study is a context-sensitive study. Context-sensitive solutions has been a term used to describe the process of balancing, striking the balance between protection and preservation of what makes these corridors unique, while also meeting transportation needs. Safety, mobility, other types of transportation needs are inherent with that. So it's striking that balance. It takes a lot of work and input to make sure that we hit that note. The steps that are being included in this process are meetings with the general public. Right now, the CSS process is occurring as we're meeting together and we're getting input on what makes these corridors particularly unique and what types of improvements are best. Development of corridor visions in concert with the agencies that are really stewards of these locations will also help with the CSS process. And also we want to make sure that the improvements preserve what is unique about these corridors. That, for example, simply widening a roadway through an area in a fashion that gets you as quick as possible from point A to point B does not accomplish that. It does not typically preserve what's unique about a corridor. So really we're all about that with this study, context-sensitive solutions. The study schedule will unfold over about a 2-year period. As I alluded to earlier, we're about halfway through. Here we are well, I shouldn't say halfway through. We're early on in the study. We're in phase 1, and our efforts have been focused on really data collection and understanding what's happening now in the corridors. We'll move on to phase 2 here in the fall and into the winter of starting to develop those corridor visions and identify improvements. Phase 3 will unfold in early 2019 and through the summer to look at more, look at those higher priority locations and identify improvements there. Tonight we'll be looking at corridor characteristics. We have, for all 17 study corridors, we have maps that identify the limits of the study corridor. We identify things like tight curves, where there are particular curves where there's a lowered advisory speed. We identify locations where there are crash problems. This particular location is Iron Mountain Road, a road familiar to all of us, I'm sure. And as we've looked at it, we've come to understand where there are particular concentrations of high accident rates, as well as features, environmental features that are really key assets that need to be preserved. We've also identified the typical section, just looking at the road and how the pavement is being used now, and obviously that's a very narrow roadway. We see 9-foot travel lanes in many locations and no shoulders. So that's an important characteristic of this particular corridor. For each corridor also, we have looked at more detail at the crash data to understand over the 5-year period between 2013 and 2017 what's been happening. Severity is one component of that, how many crashes are causing fatalities or injuries. The crash types, there are a lot of roadway departure crash types, as you might imagine here, due to the curvature of the roads and some of the uniqueness there. Motorcycles comprise a significant percentage of the traffic flow on many of these corridors, as well as they're even almost overrepresented in the crash data. There is a significant influence and connection there. Some of the challenges of navigating these corridors on a motorcycle. The time of day is also a piece of information we've been using to understand what improvements might be helpful. Another piece of information is the speed data. We've collected travel time data via vehicles driving along these corridors to understand where there are dips in speed, where there are, you might call them bottlenecks, places where there are slowdowns because of maybe slow vehicles, wildlife viewing, curvature of the road. Iron Mountain Road, you can see there's a lot of fluctuation along the length of the corridor, so there's a lot of you can speed up here, but better slow down for that curve. So there's a mechanism here that allows us to evaluate conditions traveling. And we've looked both at a time period before the tourist season and during the tourist season. So the blue and the red that you see here are those. And you see there's some similarities. There's not a lot of difference that we've found between those seasons, but there are occasions where some additional traffic does cause a bottleneck. So let's get briefly into the corridors themselves. I won't go into each one in detail. We don't have time in the presentation. That's really intended to happen after the presentation when we have individual conversations around these boards. So I'm going to move fairly quickly through these 17 corridors that have been identified in the study. There's 2 batches. The north set of corridors consists of 5 up in the Spearfish and Deadwood area. Corridors 1 and 2 traverse Spearfish Canyon. One of the things we notice about these is the south portion, Corridor 2, has a highly constrained section close to a stream. There's a lot of conflict in that area and some challenges maintaining a good roadway surface with that proximity. Corridor number 3 is 85, coming up from Wyoming. This is more of a regional connection. There are quite a few lowered speed curves through here, and the crashes seem to be concentrated mostly in the southwest portion of 85. Corridor number 4, this is a more developed area, probably the most developed area of any of our corridors, kind of the connection of Lee to Deadwood. This is a tight section too, with some geologic features right adjacent to the road, a steep roadside. And we are seeing some roadway departure crashes here, particularly concentrated around a couple of curves. Corridor number 5 is the connection up to the ski hill and the mine from Highway 85. Fair pavement condition there and a little higher crash frequency, but not necessarily severe crashes there. There are 12 south corridors around the Custer area, Keystone area. Many of them are on the Norbeck Scenic Byway. So we've kind of grouped those together for our purposes here. Corridors 6 and 7. 6 is past Jewel Cave. 7 goes through Custer State Park. These are higher relative traffic volumes when compared with the other study corridors. However, they show kind of a low to moderate potential for crash reduction. These are not necessarily the highest crash rates that we're seeing among the study corridors. There are some wildlife and road departure type crashes. Corridors 8, 9, and 13. This is Iron Mountain Road and Needles Highway. These have a lot of similar properties, so it's helpful to kind of consider them together. Highly visited roadside features and views, very narrow, high percentage of motorcycles on both of these roadways, and that's reflected in the crash frequency. Some of that related to significant roadway curvature. Corridors 10 and 11 are more kind of regional traffic connecting to Hermosa area. Higher frequency of low severity crashes. We do see some wild animal crashes emerge along these corridors. There's a broader section here than you see on many of these roads, so there's some shoulders that are provided on corridors 10 and 11. 12, 14, and 15 fit together a bit too. There's kind of moderate traffic levels. The motorcycle percentages go up on weekends on these roadways. Limited provision of shoulders here, again, a similar theme to what we see elsewhere. 16 and 17 are on the scenic byway surrounding Mount Rushmore. Concentration of roadway departure crashes is observed west of Mount Rushmore on corridor 16 there. Lots of pullouts, lots of pedestrian vehicle interaction. So there are some challenges that are unique to that. That's certainly something that we're seeking to address in the study, is the balance of modes and how different modes of traffic are using these roadways, and the importance of serving all the needs of all the users to the degree we can. It's challenging within the right of way to do that. So tonight, what we want to hear from you. First of all, we want to hear, what are the problems? What are the issues that you've experienced on these corridors that you've heard people talk about, you yourself have encountered? Safety, roadway surface condition, other travel type problems that you've experienced. Please certainly provide any input that you can on that front. Second piece of input would be improvements. What improvements do you think are most needed on these corridors? Third, features. What makes these corridors unique? There are certainly things that we can look at and come up with as consultants and identify, but you're the ones who live along these corridors, travel them every day. You understand what makes these particularly unique, so we'd like to get that down on paper as much as we can. And of course, any other corridor related information that is noteworthy, we'd like to hear from you. And again, the format is really mostly around conversations with these boards. We are going to have a brief Q&A session after I conclude here as a group, but we're not going to make that very lengthy. I think if you just got some general questions, we can take those, but then we'll move pretty quickly into the discussions at the boards. Our next steps coming out of these meetings that we're having, we will refine the analyses as we can. We're in this stage of phase 1 where we're discovering a lot about these corridors, and your input here is allowing us to discover more. So we'll refine our analyses and adjust them and incorporate all the input that we get. And then we'll sit and develop visions for improvements to these corridors, and that'll happen in collaboration with the partner agencies, the DOT, and our consultant team will come together and work on those and incorporate the feedback that we are getting. We'll conceptualize improvements. We'll start to sketch up some ideas, prioritize the projects, and provide more detailed analysis in phase 3. That'll be coming in 2019. So again, here's the web address, and if there are any questions at this time, I'd be happy to take those, and we can walk through those a bit. So,
yeah. Have to repeat it.
Repeat the web address, or oh yeah, yep, good, yep. For the and again, those of us who are on live stream, welcome. Thank you for joining us in that way, and you can provide input via the study website. There's a comment portal there that will allow you to do that. So. Do we have any questions, or go ahead, sir?
So are traffic calming enhancements beyond what's already accomplished by the curves, is that in scope, and from what you see, are there opportunities to do things beyond the natural curves that slow people down one way or another?
Good question, yeah, and to repeat the question, the basic gist of it was our traffic calming measures or strategies in play here to help with speed reduction primarily. Would that be an accurate? So absolutely, that is certainly a type of improvement that we want to hear about and would consider as a viable option. Like you said, the curves do provide, it's very clear when you look at the travel speeds on these corridors that the curves do provide a certain level of traffic calming. And there's a lot of variability in speed, so there might be places where trying to reduce the variability, the speed differentials can help deliver on safety. And that's probably the key, is how can we make sure that that improvement is delivering on safety and it's data driven. I think that's an important thing for us to focus on, but that's absolutely in play here.
So traffic calming means a curve?
Not always.
Okay, but
yes.
I mean traffic calming.
Yeah.
What is that?
Well, okay, yeah. Would you like me to try to define?
Curve's a good one, right?
Yeah.
Pretty,
yes. Yes.
It
so
slows you down one way or another, right?
Yeah. Traffic calming.
Exactly.
Yeah. Traffic calming, and that phrase is often used in neighborhood contexts, but certainly could be applied here too. Could consist of a narrowing of the road section. It's something that can contribute to a driver's perception of the environment and help them to kind of naturally decide to slow down. Sometimes things like taking out signage or pavement markings can cause somebody to even kind of slow down a bit because they don't know exactly. So there's a lot of different strategies that are used toward traffic calming, and we can look at those options. Go ahead.
Late, so if you covered this already, I'll stand down and get it later. But I'm interested in who and what is driving the project and who's paying for it.
Okay. The question was who and what is driving the project, and who is paying for the project. So I will take a shot, and then Steve, you can jump in if you've got any other thoughts on that. But the driving need for the project comes from a need for a plan that helps to implement improvements on these corridors that deliver on safety and transportation needs. So every time they come up for a pavement rehabilitation, because pavement deteriorates, and so these roads need attention periodically, rather than just replacing what is there, this is a study that can help us enrich that a bit. Maybe there's other improvements that can be implemented beyond just replacing what's there that will actually improve conditions. And we are aware that there are needs. There are obviously some safety needs that are emerging from the study on these corridors, and they can do better. When we look at how they're comparing to other roads of similar type, we see that there are some safety problems. So we want to make sure that we're doing everything to address that, and that we're doing it with collaboration from all the involved agencies and stewards of these corridors so that we can do it well. The funding for the study is coming from the DOT. I don't know if that's exclusively 100% DOT funding, or what would be the...
We're using statewide planning and research funding. 80% federal funding, 20% state.
part of the state's planning program.
Context-sensitive design, is that new? Is that a new effort in the state, or is there experience with it?
The question was, is context-sensitive design new to the state, or is there some experience with it? My understanding is there have been a number of good context-sensitive projects. I know Highway 385, the effort recently has been to make sure that those principles are being implemented. And I'm sure other examples could come to mind if we consulted with the DOT staff who are here. Context-sensitive solutions has been around a long time, maybe 30 to 40 years. Certainly grows out of some of the historical, perhaps, transportation projects that weren't as context sensitive. It was more about getting from point A to point B, and a bit of a reaction to that to come up with a process to follow. And certainly in my home state of Colorado, there's been a lot of effort to develop on I-70 through the mountains there. Some of you might be familiar with that, but that's a corridor where there's a context sensitive framework in place that every project has to come in line with over time. So it's a time-tested procedure. We're implementing some of those principles here, and I do believe they've been used in South Dakota over time as well. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
So basically master plan.
Yeah, you could say that. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. The question was basically, this is a master plan, and I think that's an accurate characterization of
So
plan that can
does
be
that
followed.
mean that today there isn't one?
Nothing quite like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, today the question was today there isn't
For
one.
these 17 corridors, or even the corridors individually, it's like, well, there's the road, and we'll deal with it when it falls apart.
It's a bit more of a maintenance
Yeah, okay.
procedure. Yeah. Yeah.
What's
Absolutely.
commercial impact you're planning? Commercial traffic, industrial traffic on these roads?
The question was, are we finding impacts related to commercial and industrial traffic? There are percentages of trucks in the traffic stream that are about what you might expect. They're not out of proportion with respect to that. I assume it's mostly kind of logging activity, not necessarily transporting goods over long haul. We are connecting with different stakeholders in the area who are involved in those industries, chambers of commerce and the like. Probably the biggest industry is tourism, and the interest in attracting more and more visitors. We've had some discussions about that and how can we make these roadways be even better for that. So that may or may not get at your question, but there are certainly impacts from industry, perhaps mostly from tourism. Okay. Oh yeah, one more. Okay.
I guess a few years back we had kind of this experience on the Iron Mountain Road where the pigtail bridges needed work. And it became quite a conflict because the DOT said, well, we have to build them to current standards, and that would mean remove the pigtail bridges. And the hammer came down pretty hard on that, and you see we do have pigtail bridges here.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just curious when it comes to DOT standards and aesthetic standards that are there now, which one went out?
The question was, what wins, aesthetic standards or DOT standards? Were you saying that the two are kind of in opposition? That's a tough question to answer. I think when delivering good transportation infrastructure, a DOT is focused on meeting standards. They're time-honored guidelines for building a road that is safe and efficient. So I think that's a starting point, and I think the Federal Highway Administration would support that. That's a starting point, but over the years there's been a lot more understanding and effort made to adjust those standards to fit, and there's been a lot of that's occurred. One example is it used to be 12-foot lanes. Got to have 12-foot lanes no matter where you are, what the context is, got to do it. Well, maybe you can go from 12 to 11, and there's not a big loss of safety, and the data actually support that type of a reduction. So that's a development in line of that. So the DOT, and I'm not a DOT staff person, but I think I can speak safely in saying that the DOT is willing to consider those variances where it can be shown that it's going to deliver on its mission of safety and efficiency, and aesthetically pleasing. That certainly is of tremendous value in these corridors. I think the state is showing its interest in preserving that value by doing this study. So I think the scenic and aesthetic principles are going to win the day on a number of these corridors in particular. And that's part of why we're doing each corridor individually, because some of the corridors are attractions in and of themselves, and they need to be treated as such, and others are more for conveying traffic, and so we want to make sure they do that and perform their objectives. So it's a long answer. I don't know if I've answered every part of your question. You can certainly talk with some FHWA and DOT folks here. But I think this is a step in the direction of balancing that. So there's not one side or the other. It's always just, we go that way all the time. Well, let's take a close look, a thoughtful look at this, and identify a plan.
Pigtail Bridge is a pretty good traffic calming.
Yeah, yeah. I would be surprised if the pigtail bridges were touched with this project. The pigtail bridges are an asset, and I think most everybody views them as such. So I'd be very surprised if anything came out of this study that would touch those. So,
Are we taking into account the fact that part of the reason that the bikers come here is because these roads are kind of unique?
Yeah, absolutely. The question was, are we accounting for the uniqueness of the area and that attraction? Yes, that's certainly part of the context. Okay, I think let's split up and have some conversations around the boards. Those of us with these name tags on are representatives of the study team, and you can catch any one of us and have a conversation. Steve, I don't know if there's anything you want to add, or okay. So thanks for coming. Let's have some good conversations. Really appreciate it.